welcome everyone. I want to, for those last couple people, just a reminder, microphones and cameras off. I have one other announcement I'd like to make before we get started. We do have participants coming from all across the country, but the majority of us, and certainly our student panelists, are in Catonsville, which was built on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people, who were among the first in the Western Hemisphere to encounter European colonists. I feel like it's really important that as we are trying to demonstrate our commitment to building solidarity with local communities and victims of oppression, that we make that land acknowledgement and we take the time out of this very full panel to do that. So with that being said, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. And before I do, because we were waiting for DeRay, I'm just going to see if he's here. DeRay?
I'm here.
Oh, hi, honey. I'm sorry.
Like the last couple of minutes. Miss Francis. That's not even your name no more. What's you gotta, she was Miss Francis to us, y'all.
Yes, I was Miss Francis, now it's Simonsen. There you are.
Miss S. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to go ahead and do my little spiel, and then we are going to get you talking, because I know there's quite a few people, and especially the students, that are super excited that you're here and want to hear from you. But I have a few things to say first. I want to remind people that for those of you that don't know, the Catonsville Women's Giving Circle was founded in 2010 by a group of women in Catonsville, many of whom are on this call, who wanted to find ways to give back to the community in meaningful ways. They decided that collective philanthropy, the notion of pooling their resources together and deciding together how to distribute those resources, would be a way to do that. So each member of the Giving Circle contributes by paying a membership fee, and then the members decide by consensus how we're going to spend that money. We distribute funds to local organizations that apply for grants. So this year, within the context of the national reckoning around social injustice in this country, the Circle members have been trying to think about the role that we can play in that movement. And ultimately what we realized was that we have the good fortune of having really fabulous youth advocates already leading the way, already articulating specific demands and challenges, already organizing and advocating and mobilizing. So our goal today is really to amplify those voices and perhaps to begin to think about the role that the Circle and the community at large can play in moving those demands forward. But we're also extremely proud to welcome back DeRay, as we just said. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about DeRay, but I'm going to remind you at every couple moments to just keep those microphones off, because I hear a little bit of background. So DeRay, who popped up, DeRay Mckesson, if you don't know, is an American civil rights activist and author focused primarily on issues of innovation, equity, and justice. So spurred by the death of Mike Brown and the subsequent protests in Ferguson, Missouri, and beyond, he's really become a key player in the work to confront systems and structures that have led to mass incarceration and police killings of Black and other minority populations. As a leading voice in the Black Lives Matter movement and as a co-founder of Campaign Mckesson has worked to connect individuals with knowledge and tools and provide citizens and policymakers with common sense policies that ensure equity. So he asked me to cut his bio down so we could get right to the good stuff, but I have to tell you, there's so many impressive things that I want to just touch on. He's the author of a 2019 book, On the Other Side of Freedom, The Case for Hope, and the host of an award-winning podcast, Pod Save the People. I know that we have a lot of his former teachers on this call, but others of you may have seen him on The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, NPR, MSNBC, CNN, usually wearing a blue vest. So it was a little, maybe that's why I didn't see you, DeRay, because you didn't have it on. But similar to the students you'll hear from tonight, Mckesson's passion and talent was evident early on. So he was actively involved in student government, and he served as the chair of a youth-led grant-making organization. So that's how I got to know him, and have been so proud to sort of watch his growth and the way he's continued to lead. So we're so happy to have you, DeRay. I'm gonna sort of just say that in DeRay's book, if you haven't read it or listened to it as I did, it's just beautiful. I was talking to one of the student panelists today about how it's been described as a meditation and a guidebook, and it really is both. But in your book, DeRay, you read extensively about your experiences in Ferguson during the protests. You talk about how the protesters, you and other protesters, used social media to organize, that you leverage those technologies to organize outside of traditional structures. And while I was listening to that, I was thinking about, you said that two things were really essential there, the relationships and the proximity to the issue. As I was listening to that and thinking about tonight, I was thinking that I would offer that this event, and honestly, the Giving Circle in general, is based on some of those same guiding principles, that through learning about our grantees, we learn about our neighbors, our neighbors that they serve. And then we develop a sense of connectivity and shared responsibility. Brian Stevenson says proximity is a pathway through which we learn the things we need to know to make healthier communities. And that's what we're all trying to do here, is make a healthier community. And so, again, thank you. I want to let you know that we know that DeRay, you got called into something, right? So you're gonna have to hop off at a certain point. So we've reorganized things a little. So here's what's gonna happen tonight is I'm gonna introduce one of our students who's gonna introduce the other students. She's gonna ask the initial question of them so that you kind of get to see them, hear them, get to know who they are. Then I'm gonna ask you a bunch of follow-up questions. And then when you hop off, we'll return to our advocate. So the folks that are calling in from all over the place, we promise to make sure we talk to the students, but we wanna also make sure to take advantage of the time we have with DeRay. So that's how the night's gonna flow. All right, well, without further ado, Hazel, I'm gonna pass the mic off to you so you can introduce our students.
Thank you, Monica, and just thank you to everyone for being here. It's pretty incredible to see that we have 109 participants right now. That's all we hope for. And DeRay, we're honored to have you here. It's literally incredible. I'm shaking a little bit to have you just in our virtual presence. But anyway, my name is Hazel, and for those of you who didn't have the chance to attend our Catonsville Youth for Black Lives Matter protest this summer on June 24th, the Catonsville Youth for Black Lives Matter group involved about 60 students, including those who graduated and who are still in Catonsville today. Virtually, but the goal of our protest this summer was to amplify the voices of Black students and students of color at our school in an event for the community to listen, learn, to take a step out of our comfortability and take actions toward upholding educational equity for minority students, as well as demand that Black Lives Matter here in Catonsville and everywhere. The students featured on tonight's panel discussion include some of these incredible speakers. They're also continued activists and peer role models at the summer protest. So these leaders include, and I'll have you guys wave as I introduce you. Nusrat Tusi, who is a current senior at Catonsville High School and an organizer, host, and performer at the protest. She is also the president of our school's diversity club and student sharing, which is a community service-based club, as well as vice president of the National Honor Society, and she's also an intern for the Council on American Islamic Relations. Briana Whitehurst is a current junior and speaker at the protest. Deborah Tadesse is a freshman at American University and speaker at the protest. She participated as a fellow in the Elijah Cummings Youth Program and has worked for diversity efforts in religion at a Horizon Apprentice. Michael Wright is a current senior and speaker at the protest. He is treasurer of the class of 2021 and an aspiring educator. Awesome. Stephen Hook is a current senior, and he spoke at the protest about the privilege he's experienced as a white student at CHS. He is also editor-in-chief of the Catonsville High School yearbook, as well as president of the National Honor Society. Taylor Holmes is a current junior and speaker at the protest. She is also the current president of the class of 2022. Bethlehem Wolde, current senior and class of 2021 president at CHS. She helped to plan, co-host, and speak at the protest. She has spoken and worked with groups such as Progressive Maryland Justice Task Force, the Baltimore County Board of Education, University of Maryland Global Campus, Baltimore County Youth and Justice Advocates United, and other organizations. And that actually concludes our panelists for tonight, but thank you again. And without further ado, we'll get started with the first question of tonight's panel, which is, what do you want adults in Catonsville to know about how racism affects you and students and young adults in your community?
Okay, so I can tackle that one. Hi, everyone. I'm Beth. As far as how racism affects me as a young adult in Catonsville and just overall in America, I am an African American girl. It's something it's not that I cannot hide. It's something that when people first look at me, that's the first thing they notice, whether they want to admit it or not. For me personally, racism affects me in a way that makes me feel as if two parts of myself are constantly in conflict, being joined together by the fact that society tells me and many others that we will never measure up to the standards upheld by our white peers. We are left kind of at this constant crossroads of, do we appeal to white comfort and do we sacrifice our self-expression, which is something that I've struggled with myself, or do we use our voices and do we take the painful step forwards to advocate for change? And it's just kind of one of those really hard things to, first of all, accept that there is a problem and that there's a problem that affects you constantly and daily. And then moving on from that and seeing, how can I affect change in this? And what can I do as a person with the standing that I have now and with whatever privileges, whether it's socioeconomic or anything else that I can do with that. And yeah, it's a hard thing. It's always been a hard thing. And this is something that America has struggled with for a while. But I think that despite everything and despite like racism occurring in almost every aspect of my life, I'm not going to let it hold me back. And I will pass the baton over to Taylor or Michael.
So for me personally, what I want adults to know about racism, especially in Catonsville and other areas, is that it just affects me in a way that when I go outside, I know I'm going to be seen as a certain person, you know, despite like my accomplishments, despite the opportunities I've had, despite the things I've done, I'm always seen as this, you know, a loud person, as like a person with an attitude. And I'm always perceived as that before people get to know me. And that's how I'm always categorized. That's how I'm seen. And it affects me because I realize that people aren't ever going to truly see who I am without me having to explain myself or having to tell people that, oh, I've done this or I'm this. And I shouldn't have to explain why I should be seen as a certain way, why I should be seen as valid, or why I should be seen and respected on the same level as other people. And it's just really frustrating for me and other like students like me. I know Beth, you talked about how it's kind of like you're competing with yourself. You know, do I kind of stay where people want me to be? Do I kind of be the person that people expect me to be without like, you know, denying who I truly am, denying like other parts of me, you know? And it's just a really difficult battle and struggle just for people to see that.
And relating to what my fellow panelists have said about how they feel that they have to hide themselves in society, we shouldn't have to feel that way about our culture, about our skin, about who we are. We shouldn't have to hide who we are just for people to feel comfortable about their behaviors and their actions toward us. We should be able to live without fear and without any judgment in this world.
Excellent. Thank you for, that's a hard thing right off the bat to sort of open up with something, asking you to be so vulnerable. I'm going to sort of move us into asking DeRay some questions, and the first one is a really nice transition. We want to know, DeRay, how those experiences that the students just finished describing sort of track with your memories of growing up in this community.
Yeah, so I went to Catonsville Middle and Catonsville High. I will just say, and this will be my last shout out to Miss Simonsen, I think I said it right, is that it's like a really cool honor to be on a call 20 years later with your teacher and be like, whoa, it's my teacher. And I say that as somebody who did teach, you know, I taught 6th grade math, and even when I'm around my students, it's an honor. So I'm proud that you remember me, that you reached out, and it is really cool to be back in a place that raised me. So when I think about this, I'm always reminded, you know, people give the city a lot of grief, like, you know, the city is where all the problems are, and Baltimore City is the scourge of Maryland, and that, like, you know, people have always treated Baltimore County as like the border town that is like the thing containing all the chaos in the city. And the reality is, when we zoom out and we look at the data, we're reminded that the Baltimore County Police actually killed more people than any police department in Maryland last year. Like Baltimore County is tied with 2 other police departments for killing the most people this year. It's not the city, right? So like when we think about what the data tell us, even SWAT team deployments, like no knock raids and stuff like that, when we think about the last year of data we have, which is 2014, it was PG County, it was Montgomery County, Baltimore County, and then Baltimore City. It wasn't the city. The city wasn't the leading spot for SWAT team deployments that are almost always majority used for drugs, right? So that what you said about your experience makes sense to me, because the data both shows it, and that was mine. Like, what does it mean to be in a place where people think it is everything's so hunky-dory and everything's so like everything's great, and you're like, you know, when I was at Catonsville, all the Black kids were in standard. Like that was when tracking was like hardcore. It was like every Black kid. I was in honors, and it was like a thing, you know. And like there were, I don't know, 2 Black people in gifted and talented. Maybe I wasn't one of them. I remember when I was like in AP Psych, I was the only. There were 2 Black people in any AP class at Catonsville High that I was in my entire time, and it was a. I remember I couldn't get into AP English, you know, like so. We didn't have the language for it then, because I was just like, what it was like, I don't know, I'm like, that's just how the school had worked for so long. And my father, you know, loves us. My father raised us. He was great, but like he would never go to a school and like demand a class change. That like wasn't the way he thought of it as power. White parents did that all the time. I would see white parents come in and be like, my kid should be in this math class. And it was such a lesson for me in like social capital and how race influences power, and like I didn't have the language for it then, but I saw it. And we say that in organizing all the time, right? That people often have the experiences before they have the language. And like, I learned the language later, but I definitely had all those experiences. You know, I even think about what does after school look like when you ain't nobody there to pick you up, or like you can't drive, you know, like it was so many things that I didn't think about in a place that called itself resource rich, and like, you know, that was like, we can make everything available. And it's like, well, if you're poor, I don't know how resource rich the school actually is.
Sorry for the delay there. I couldn't find my unmute. So it's so fun to have you back, because you're so accomplished and so articulate, and you do all these things, but then you just sort of sound like DeRay when you're sitting here having a conversation. It's so fun. So you told us a little bit about, you know, what it felt like, you know, being in schools in Catonsville, but then how did your experience as an educator? Because after, you know, before you became this well-known activist, you were an educator in Baltimore and New York and Minneapolis, right? So how did those experiences inform your understanding of inequities and racism, especially across education?
So teaching, I taught in East New York, Brooklyn, 6th grade math, which was incredible. My students are now like 20, 22, 23, which is, they were 11 when I knew them. So that was big because, you know, I taught in the single biggest project community in the United States. It's very far East Brooklyn. Like you would never wander into East New York. Start City is where I taught. And people had all these misconceptions about our kids, and our kids were so far away that like I don't know how much time any of you spent in New York City, but they would be like, have you ever been to Manhattan? Because it literally was just that far away that like they hadn't traveled outside of Brooklyn, because like it was very deep in Brooklyn. And I taught all of 6th grade math by Christmas, like the whole year's worth of curriculum I taught by Christmas my 2nd year. So we did 7th to 11th grade algebra, and it was really cool. But I would get these class of observations, and people would be like, I didn't know your kids could factor polynomials. And you're like, it's math. Like this isn't even like I don't know, like, of course they can. Why couldn't they? If they can factor, they can factor. If they like know how to, if they know basic rules about algebra, they can do really complicated things, because the rule is sort of the rule, right? So like, I just have to make them confident about it. But like 11-year-olds can definitely foil, you know, like, you know, but it was one of those things that I would have to, people would be like, wow, you're so magical. And I'm like, I mean, I am a good teacher, but like the kids are the magic. I just like help package the content. They had the magic. And that was interesting to see that in play. And in Baltimore, so I didn't teach in Baltimore. I opened up an after school center on the west side out of Ashburton that still exists. I opened that a decade ago. So we serve 5th through 8th graders. And then I was the chief human capital for the school system in Baltimore. And in both of those roles, I saw both the footprint of the school system. So in Baltimore, the school system employs as many people as the city itself. So I managed everything to do with adults in the school system. And then the after school center, you know, we were one of the first after school centers a decade ago that said that we were going to make an academic commitment to kids, and we weren't just really cool babysitters, but we were going to try and make sure that we impacted their grades, right? So like really intense homework prep, or test prep, all this other stuff. And I remember 10 years ago, that was like a radical idea. People were like, wow, you're doing like academic support. And I had kids 3 to 8 p.m. Could you imagine being in school all day long and then being with me from 3 to 8? We were all tired. It was like, go home at 8 o'clock. It was like, get out. I'm ready to go. You tired of me? Like, we served a full dinner. It was a whole thing. And we loved each other, but it was a real wraparound. And if anything, that just reminded me how much our kids deserve and how little they have, right? That like, they didn't have a lot of resources in the neighborhood, not because they weren't gifted and they weren't amazing and they didn't want them. They didn't exist. And our program was like the first time the kids traveled out of state. It was the first sleepaway experience because we took them on college visits. And it was like, you actually just deserve this, right? This shouldn't be some like really cool summer thing just because we are a program. Like, kids deserve this. And, you know, when we think about affluent kids, a lot of affluent kids and white kids in the county, like those experiences are just like a norm. They're not like some really cool like aberration or fluke that happens. It is like, that's just what we expect kids will have. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, the city, because of the drama in the city, there's been a conversation about like social workers and schools and therapists and stuff like that, which is true, right? Like, everybody should have access to mental health supports. But we in the school system would always say, and the superintendent was always intense about this, that it's only Black kids and poor kids that the only response to trauma should always be therapy. Everybody else, the response to trauma is like art. It's sports. It's just like, people process pain and stress in a whole host of ways. Why do poor people only get to process it in therapy? Therapy should be one of the things that people have access to, right? It shouldn't be the only thing. Like, kids, young people deserve a range of outlets. And like, we would always have to push up on the way that racism like subtly made its appearance in meetings, or subtly like, you know, we'd see a school where no kid, I walk into a classroom and I look at the data, no kid can read. And it's like, well, either all the kids are dumb or like we are failing them as adults. And it's like, we are actually failing you as adults. Like, if a group of third graders cannot read, that is not dumb third graders. That is like an ecosystem of adults who have failed them, right? And how do we start to be more honest about that? And like, that was my experience in education. I would see people blame kids for being dumb. Like, that is in essence what they were doing, as opposed to taking the responsibility of like, okay, it's a gazillion adults around here. And the fact that nobody in this class can read is not because they don't care. Like, that's not fair.
No, I think that's so beautifully said. You know, we're going to spend some time when we're talking to the youth a little bit more about their asks related to education. But I want to sort of capitalize on your really rich experiences, you know, being on the front line with a number of protests and sort of thinking about organizing, you know, what's happened. You know, you wrote your book before George Floyd and before this summer, right? And so I'm curious as to, you know, what parallels or differences you see, you know, this year to the earlier protests that you had been involved in on those early days of Ferguson, you know, just sort of what your thoughts are on how Black Lives Matter has sort of redefined activism. I'm just curious on sort of of the evolution of the movement, and if you could share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me show you something. I'm not a Debbie Downer. I'm actually like a pretty hopeful guy. But let me just say that I think this moment is sort of oddly celebratory. When we look at the data, we are reminded that the police have killed more people in general, not less. So 2014, the first protest, the protest that I was originally involved in, that is the lowest year of police murders or police violence, police killings that we have ever recorded. So a lot of people anecdotally are like, it's getting better. It got better. It got better. It did not get better. You just didn't see a lot of viral videos in 2017 or 18. Those are bad years. They were worse than the year that the protests began. Just so you know, there's no data before 2013. So if you got killed by a police officer before 2013, there's no data. And if you get killed today by a police officer and a newspaper doesn't cover it, I think you don't exist in any of the databases. The other thing I'll show you is that this is the Washington Post database, which is shootings. So I can talk about that in a second, but this is a database of shootings. And when you look at it, the black line is 2019. The orange line is 2020. The police have killed more people today than last year at this time. Not a dip. Not quarantine didn't slow it down. COVID didn't slow it down. The protests didn't slow it down. Like, the police are like on track to be right where they were last year, if not worse. what people also don't realize is the police actually kill more people in suburban communities than in urban communities. So when you think, when I look at the data and I'm like, wow, the Baltimore County Police killed more people in Maryland than any jurisdiction, not surprising to me, because the data shows us that that is actually more true. Baltimore County is more representative of the problem across the country than Baltimore City. It's not what the media would have you believe. It's not what the narratives in social media would have you believe. But what is true is that in suburban and rural communities, the police are killing more people. In cities, the police are actually killing less people. And when we think about the 3 biggest databases of police violence, the Washington Post, most people know that's only shootings. So George Floyd's not in a database because he wasn't killed with a gun. Fatal encounters is great. They include everything though. So like death by suicides in their database. So anybody who dies in the presence of police. And mapping police violence is our database. It's all on duty, off duty, all weapons. Where an officer was actively killed somebody. The last thing I'll show you here is this. I'll give you a second to look at it. We do this at the end of every year, but we did it sort of midway through this year just because we wanted to see what it looked like. And again, you anecdotally would believe that like quarantine is March. You like, who are you killing in March? Nobody's outside. But you look at the data, every day in March, the police killed somebody. You look at July, we still in the house. Every day the police killed somebody, right? So when I think about what is different to your question, I think what's different is that the protest and the conversation has become much more mainstream, for sure, right? I think that the numbers aren't changing though. So, you know, I'm seeing magazine covers and and I'm like, yo, what is going on? We are not, the numbers aren't dipping yet. Like we still have to fight, like our life is on the line because it is. So I worry a little bit that like people are confusing an awareness of the problem with a change in the problem, and like that's not the same thing, right? That like that when I zoom out, I'm like, what are we trying to do? It is this idea that like we're trying to eat an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You've heard that before. Now there's one version that says one bite at a time, which is one bite after another. That's incrementalism. We don't believe in that. There's another version that says we are all biting at the same time, right? That this has to be a multi-pronged strategy all at the same time, and that's what we believe. So we need people like you, like Baltimore County has legislation coming up soon. We need people to like put pressure on the police department and community and whatever, because we are not yet winning. We are definitely winning the symbolic battle, but symbols don't save people's lives, right? Structures changing is what saves people's lives.
So, you know, this wasn't really on, I wasn't planning on following up with more information about your organization, but will you tell us a little bit about your work with Campaign Zero? I'd love to just be able to highlight it a little bit. Could you tell us what you're doing?
Yeah, so it's a simple idea, right? We call ourselves Campaign Zero because we think we can get to zero. We can live in a world where the police don't kill people. We can live in a world where we transition from understanding the police as key to public safety. We ask the question, what do you need a gun to respond to? Do you need a gun to respond to a kid stuck in a tree? No. Does somebody need a gun to respond to a car accident? Probably not. Should there be a gun when you respond to somebody who has suicidal ideation? I don't think so, right? Like, so we are trying to like reframe this problem for people. You know, people say to me all the time, well, DeRay, policing is really hard. And you know, are you saying the police should never kill somebody? I'm like, well, when should the police kill your best friend or your child? What's the scenario where your best friend does something wrong and they get a bullet through their head? Is it a bank robbery? Is it a car chase? Like and if you can't think of that for your sister or your brother or your mother, then nobody should have to think about that question at all. That police don't get to be executioners. So a lot of it is reframing, but we use the data to guide us and to roll out these roadmaps for people about how they make change at the structural level. Because what we know is that the police love moments like this. They love moments where it's documentaries and flags and statues, all things that are good. Like the statue should go. We shouldn't celebrate racists. But if the structures don't change, it doesn't matter. So that's what we do.
All right, so I'm gonna put you on the spot then and ask you, because you know there's actually there's a reporter that's joined us tonight, and so she's somewhere in that panel.
You trying to get me in trouble?
Oh no. What I was gonna say is she asked me yesterday, "What's your outcome?" You know, she wanted me to answer, "What's the outcome that I want of this event?" And I stammered a little, and I said, "You know, we're sort of stuck between we want that proximity, but we want to move beyond performative actions. So if you could sort of think about the fact that we've got a representative group of people in the community, from the community here, and you want them to take something away, you've got this chance to speak back to your hometown here and say, you know, what are a couple of things? So let's focus on the police brutality, because that's really where, you know, you kept us today. What are some actionable things that we can do as members of the community to address that?
So the Baltimore County Council, Councilman Jones on the council introduced a bill to rein in the power of the police like a couple of weeks ago. It failed. He did not have the votes. He has reintroduced it, and like it needs people like you to press, right? That like it needs people like you to like hammer your council. If Councilman Jones is not your council member, then you should be stressing out all those other people. And remember that people don't really reach out to council members, or like that's not a thing. Like people are not having call-in campaigns and email, like it's not happening. So if you got like 15 people that you know to email council members, like that would actually go a big way. Like, and the challenge is that the police are the only people who normally show up at these things. They're the only people who testify. They're the only people who email. So we're in the room trying to like tell council members what's true and what's not true. And it's just like a whole lot of, it's us and the police who are like organized. I mean, the police are like, they are organized in killing these things. And like, that's actually an immediate thing that like Councilman Jones had to water down his bill a little bit because he lost last time. Like it got voted down, but he reintroduced it. And I think that there's going to be a ban on no-knock raids happening. Like a bill's going to come out, and like y'all could champion that. Cause like when we look at the data, it is Baltimore County that is, I'm gonna see if I can pull it up real quick. It's Baltimore County that is leading in some of the data in SWAT team deployments. You never hear about it because if you just saw the news, you would think that Baltimore City is the only place where the police do anything and that Baltimore County is just chilling. And maybe people know Corinne Gaines, but like they don't know, there are very few people who can name all 6 people that the police killed in the past year. But it is like a real thing. I'm gonna pull this up real quick because I want you to see it, because it is like, you know, we talked to a lot of legislators and they haven't seen the data either. And we're like, hey, that's why there is data. But look at this. Look at Baltimore County. This is about no-knock raids. This is fascinating to me, right? You look at this, people, everybody's like, the city's going wild. PG County, Baltimore County, way more than the city. So that is wild. And when you scroll down, and I can send Miss Simonsen, I can send her this data. But when you a part 2 crime is drugs, 60% of the raids are for drugs. We shouldn't be knocking down people's houses for small amounts of weed. Like the police are not raiding drug kingpin houses. That's not happening. It's not. So I say all this to say that like, there is a lot to do in Baltimore County, and part of it is like forcing people to acknowledge that there's a problem. Because there are a lot of white people, especially in the county, who are like, this is not, you know, we only have to deal with this because of the city. You're like, nope, this is the county's problem. And the county needs to do something, and like your council needs to be pushed on it because they have not been.
Okay.
And the executive, Johnny O, somebody need to stress Johnny O. These are employees, they work for y'all. Y'all need to stress these people out.
All right. So obviously that's you know, your entire campaign, I think the majority of the work you're doing is around police brutality now, but given that I'm going to ask the students in a few moments to talk more about their school, you know, their school demands, do you have some, you know, we've got a lot of teachers, some of them your former teachers, right? What would be some specific actionable steps that you would recommend to your school, or to, you know, to the teachers on the call, to the educators on the call? What are sort of your best suggestions for moving us forward?
Who are the former teachers on here? I don't see it. Who?
Well, there's a couple that are registered.
Okay. I'm like, where they at? I loved Catonsville. Catonsville was great. Miss Rupel was my person. Her kids are so old now. I'm like, oh my God, Stevie's going to college. So I'd say, you know, I think about AP Psych. I think about my English classes. I read so few non-white authors like during my whole high schooling, and like that was a choice, right? So I think that the curricular part of high school and college is actually like really big, and people will tell you we don't have the text and da-da-da. You figured out a way to make sure that I read every white person who ever wrote anything from 6th through 12th grade, and like Black people write books too. So and they write great books. So let's figure that out. I think that the curricular things are, you know, I think that's really important. I think that I don't know if tracking is still a thing, but the way that we decide who is worthy of rigorous education was racist when I was in high school and middle school. So I think that is like a big lever. Um, those are the two that come to mind the most about like in my experience in Catonsville. But I'm happy to hear what y'all like. I'm here to listen. So
Yeah, so let me move into that a little bit. Let me let me just ask the students. They had did you see the coverage of their march? They put together this unbelievable march in the spring.
Catonsville March, you sent it to me, didn't you?
Yeah. The Catonsville students did, and in it they actually made a series of demands. And so I'm going to ask a couple of students to tell us a little bit about the demands that they articulated, and they related to education. So I think the first one is Nusrat. We're going to share.
Thank you. Our first demand, and one of the main reasons why we've gathered here today to inform the Catonsville community of the fact that after the protest, the performative action has happened, but we have demands and we will press for them to be met. And one of our demands is bias training being required for all teachers and school staff. And then Black history courses besides MLK, Harriet Tubman, the civil rights movement, and slavery. And the College Board actually has various African history AP courses that our school does not offer at the moment, which we think should be implemented in our school and offered to students. And then another thing that we're also on the verge of accomplishing and collecting data for is taking police out of Baltimore County schools with juvenile public defenders. And another one of our demands is what DeRay talked about, ending structural segregation that like schools just instinctively have. And I'll hand it off to Bree.
Hi, sorry I couldn't find the unmute button. But the other demands that we also had, which one of them you spoke about just a few minutes ago, DeRay, was including more like African authors in the curriculum, because I can't really list off a single one I've read so far in my high school experience. And zero tolerance for hate speech and banning hate symbols such as like the Confederate flag, yeah.
So the one thing I didn't hear you say that I remember really jumping out at me after the march was the need for more mirrors, having the hiring and retention of Black and Brown teachers. I believe Michael and Nusrat were going to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so we feel that the need for Black and Brown teachers it's a very great need that we need to address in Baltimore County. And not only in Baltimore County, but just in the nation, because diversity promotes new ideas on how to address problems, and having the same types of people teaching our students it's not that they're doing a bad job or anything, but just having more different perspectives and voices in our educational system. It's good because it helps just create new solutions to different problems that you may have. And then also, I can speak for myself personally. It's inspiring to see someone who looks like you in such a valuable profession such as teaching, because as we've learned during this pandemic, teaching is a very valuable profession. And seeing someone that looks like you in that job field, it's very inspiring, because I know that me personally, I've never had a Black teacher or teacher of color. I've only had mostly white female teachers, some white males, but I want to be a teacher. I want to be an elementary school teacher. And whenever I tell people that, they're always like, oh, you're going to make such a big difference. Just you physically being in a classroom is going to make such a big difference. And at first when they would say that, I was a little confused, and I was like, oh, okay. But now I realize that I am just me physically being in the classroom is going to make such a big difference, because I know I have not experienced a male teacher of color as my teacher, and it just leaves a feeling of, I don't even know the word to describe it, but it makes you feel a certain type of way when you don't see someone who looks like you teaching you in a classroom. So that's why we feel that it's very important for more diversity in the field of teaching.
Thank you so much. One of the other questions related to those demands, you talked about having not enough mirrors, not enough examples, having a lot of white authors. And you talked about Black history. I think Deborah or Taylor, maybe both of you, were going to talk a little bit about maybe a moment in Black history, or a part of Black history that you feel like is really omitted from your education.
Okay, so we've all heard of or know at some capacity about Rosa Parks and how she refused to give up her seat on the Montgomery bus, and that might be the extent to what you all may know about Rosa Parks. So let me tell you a little bit about one of the many impacts that she had. In December of 1955, after she was arrested for refusing to give up her seat, there were local pastors who rallied up the Black community to boycott buses citywide. They called themselves the Montgomery Improvement Association, or MIA, and they elected none other than Martin Luther King Jr. to be their first president. So Rosa Parks had a direct impact on one of the first strides of freedom that Martin Luther King Jr. had. And the fact that Rosa Parks' actions had an immediate impact that started MLK's first professions of activism is something that I want to talk about, because 9 months before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin did the exact same thing. And so that might raise the question, why don't we know about her? And how comes we've never learned about her? And we've only learned about Rosa Parks. So the NAACP, they decided that it was best to raise a platform for Rosa Parks because Claudette Colvin was too young. And it's not even just that, she was also not fair-skinned and didn't have presentable hair. And then later on, she became pregnant. And to me, that's extremely aggravating, to be pushed to the side by the leaders of the civil rights movement and to be deemed not worthy enough for recognition because of her appearance and her age. And the fact of the matter was that Claudette Colvin displayed so much strength, so much courage for the time period she was in to refuse to get out of her seat, especially at her age. Even in the fundamentals of activism, there is racism. And the fact that Rosa Parks is in place of Claudette Colvin because of her skin tone, her hair, her age, highlights the same exact racial issues that we have set in our society today. And the fact that I haven't learned about Claudette Colvin in my history class only emphasizes the necessity for youth to speak up on the matters of injustice so that we can be heard and not buried by the people who say that we are not worthy of acknowledgement or that we're too young to be activists, like they said about Claudette Colvin. And then now I'd like to pass it to Taylor.
So going kind of off of what Deborah said about just how smaller ranges of Black history in the curriculum, it's just ridiculous to me, the fact that there are so many Black history, there's so much Black history and so many important players in Black history, not even Black history, but American history and natural history. And the fact that we only learn about a select group is just, you can't help feel that it's purposeful, that it's trying to achieve a certain, motive or something, that we only learn about so few players of Black history and just American history. Some people I wish I was taught about include Marsha P. Johnson, in the Stonewall riots. She was just such an incredible person and so inspiring in what she did, and it's just ridiculous we don't learn about it. Shirley Chisholm as well, who was one of the first Black women elected to Congress, just her story and how much she did is just incredible, and it's crazy we don't learn about it. And then Harriet Tubman, we always hear about Harriet Tubman and how she freed the slaves, but many people don't realize that, she was a big player in the Civil War as well. She worked for the Union side as a spy. She kind of helped them gain another victory as well as freeing hundreds and hundreds of slaves. And it's just crazy to me that our view of Black history and the history of our world is so small.
I'm sitting over here and I have this ridiculous grin on my face because I was literally, as Deborah was talking, I was writing a note to ask DeRay to talk about Claudette Coleman, because DeRay, I think you actually say, I feel like you tell that story in your book. And am I right? Is DeRay so?
I'm on mute, but yes, yep.
Yeah. No, and so I was about to say, actually, let me tell you something else. And then these guys have it. You know, one of the things I've been continually blown away, not by the passion and the gift and the talent and all that stuff, but really the sophistication of of the youth panelists and the work that they're doing. And I want to make sure it's really kind of remarkable. I would love, I just want to make sure I get to this question before you have to hop off. You've talked a lot about sort of the movement changing and it happening outside of traditional structures, and how I just really would love to hear the advice that you have for the youth in sort of figuring out how to actualize it. They have the experience, they've got the language, right? And in a way that you said, you didn't have. What is your advice in sort of figuring out how they channel what they have into sort of actionable change?
Yeah, so my advice is like, the advice I give to myself is this idea of like, chase the question. Every day I wake up being like, how do we get to zero? That's like my question. I'm like, what can I do today to get us closer to zero? And to be able to do good work at scale, you want to make sure that you have asked enough questions so that your big question you can chase. So like, I'm like, is it sheriffs? What do you do with sheriffs? Do we need to change how do we get as many people out of jail today as we can? Like, it is all those things, but it means that I'm doing like a lot of reading that people, because one of the criticisms of me, people are like, DeRay's a celebrity activist and he's just on TV. And it's like, I spend so much time like reading these random studies, on the phone with these random experts about this niche thing that like, you'll just never see, because like, why would you see it? But it's important. So when I go into the room, I can talk about, I know that the police kill more people in Baltimore County than any other place, because I personally looked at the spreadsheet. I went through the names myself. I didn't call somebody. I did it, right? I saw somebody hint to something like that, and I was like, let me go check the data. I'm pulling up the spreadsheet. I got it, right? But like, we actually have to be like confident enough to do that. The second thing is the coolest thing about younger people, because I think I'm still young, is you often have the best imagination because you haven't seen anything else, right? You haven't been in a room where like your idea got shot down by the chief of police and the da-da-da-da and the da-da-da, and then you're like, which is cool. So like, you can dream about what the best classroom should look like, or like, what is a world without the police, or da-da-da. And like, the older and older people get, and they just lose that sense of imagination and wonder. And like, we just can't do our best work without imagination and wonder. So like, you should take this moment to like dream all of it. You should be like, what do we do when the police aren't here? Da-da-da. How do we make the community safe? Like, because I'm telling you, the more and more I organize, I spend more time trying to give people back that sense of wonder and imagination. Like, that's a whole job now, because people lose it. And like, part of what happens, especially if you grow up poor or marginalized, is that you start to understand the constraints because you had to. It wasn't sort of cool to understand them. It was a matter of survival for you. So you knew how, I think about growing up, we were definitely not wealthy. We were like solidly middle class, but I remember being like, my father has a bag of quarters. I can only take but so much because I need lunch money, and I'm trying to starve at school. And like, I had to figure out like, how would I make sure I ate every day? I had no money myself, no job. We were always making these like constraint-based decisions. And there are a lot of us who never ever move out of that. Like, that is like the only way we know the world, but we can't plan freedom in a world of constraints. Like, freedom is necessarily bigger than the constraints that are in front of us. So I'd say like, keep those dreams. And the only other story I'd say, and this is in the book, but people don't know that the Montgomery bus boycotts were started by one professor. She was like, I think we should boycott. She went down to the printer at the school, printed off 50,000 flyers when that was like a real hard thing to do, and passed them out, not at the church, but at the high school. It was high schoolers who took the first risks and said they weren't going to ride the bus. Like, if it was not for high schoolers, there would be no bus boycotts. The old people joined later. The high schoolers were like, bus, that's easy. We got it, light work. And people also don't know, if you've never been to Montgomery, it's so interesting the way we get taught about Rosa Parks. And like, shout out to Rosa. Rosa did good work. But Rosa was on the bus for like seconds. I saw it, like, they have it in Montgomery, they have it like sort of charted, like where she got on the bus and where she gets off. You can like throw a ball without a whole lot of like anything, power, And like Rosa Parks might have been on the bus for like 13 seconds. It's like such a fascinating way that we tell like the story we tell, because in my head, she was on that bus for like an hour. It was like stressful and like it was still hard, but it's so interesting when you go to Montgomery, you go to Selma and see the way that we have mythologized so many things, and still haven't told complete stories.
Right. Oh gosh, yeah. I could sit there and listen. I almost got distracted because I was like, "So tell me more stories." So I love the fact that you talked about this in your book about sort of trying to keep that hope alive and keep that optimism alive. I'm going to ask the students. I know that there are a couple of elementary and middle school teachers on the call, and parents. Right. I have 2 middle school boys now. I want to hear from our high schoolers that same sense of advice. So what have you learned so far that you think you want to pass down to sort of younger advocates or parents of elementary school kids to start thinking about, cultivating a passion for social justice and figuring out how to channel that energy? So since I'm a little out of order because of this, I want to just remind you who said they were going to chime in. Let's see. Oh, Deborah, again, sorry about that.
Okay, so I just want to start off by saying there's a sense of racism and absolute disrespect with performative action and activism when you only post stuff so that you don't taint your image or follow because it's a trend, you disregard what the movement stands for. And just solely posting a black box on Instagram does not provide a shield of protection and create a platform for which one can say, I'm not racist. It's not a one and done. And then I also want to bring into light the American dream. And this might sound a little pessimistic, but a dream is all it'll ever be if when we wake up, we don't decide to change. So my advice is to be like Claudette Colvin, don't be afraid to speak out on what you stand for, and don't ever let age be a reason why somebody says to you, you cannot do something or you cannot have a belief. And do your research. I know for especially people around my age group that infographics have been something that people decide they want to spread, and that's absolutely great. But if you don't do your research and actually read what the pictures are, and the infographics have been disguised to look pretty so that you don't actually read what's on them. You only read the first page, and that's not okay. You have to do your research. And then the last thing I want to say is that it sounds kind of cliche, but surround yourself with the right type of people. It's so easy to stick with the same people you've known for years, and it's okay to have these uncomfortable conversations with your friends where you tell them that their actions are racist or that their actions are not okay. But when the frequencies of those types of conversations are consistent with your friend group, you need to either get out or you need to tell them once and for all, like, this is it. Like, you need to change. You either need to get out of that friend group or you need to tell them to change, because it's not okay. Yeah, let me pass it on to Beth.
Okay, to kind of bounce off of what Deborah was saying, to put it bluntly, you need to stop being okay with racist behaviors around you just because they don't affect you. Allyship is not something that you just get because you repost a Black Square or because you repost an infographic that you've never even fully read. Allyship is something that you earn, and something that you work for, and you have to work for it constantly, and you have to work towards these kinds of things constantly. I think a major problem, and also to address the thing of like, how do you avoid being performative activists in your youth, is to make sure that your motives behind activism aren't rooted in promoting your resume or trying to get into a good college. Another thing, exactly what Deborah touched on, the people you surround yourself with. When your uncle or your aunt or your best friend or your cousin makes a statement that's out of line, you can't keep using the excuse, that's just how so-and-so is, that's just how so-and-so views things, and there's nothing I can do about it. But there is something you can do about it. You can say something, you can educate them, because activism is more than just educating yourself. It's educating those around you and not putting that task on people of color and expecting them to constantly carry the burden and carry the torch of having to solve your issues and talk to your racist uncle or talk to your politically incorrect friend. And you need to, and then I think that what many white people in Catonsville and beyond fail to realize is that everyone carries biases. And that's learned from, to put it simply, our inherently racist society. And that is just further supported and carried through like privilege and neglect and silence. And you need to understand that everyone has unlearning to do, and we will always have to work towards that in order for our society to make any kind of foothold into the future that hopefully will be brighter and hopefully won't keep having us having to keep planning these kinds of things and keep having to constantly push the notion that this isn't enough and we have to keep working towards dissolving the systemic racism in our society.
And then to add on to that, one of the biggest issues I see with people my age is that they're so obsessed with their outward appearance and what people think of them, and they're always trying to prove something. But my advice is to focus on your work, and then people's idea of you will come after that. One example I have of people getting wrapped up in kind of the Instagram world is you spend 5 minutes decorating this Instagram story and it's super cute. You have stickers and you have text and it's a really cute infographic. But why don't you spend those 5 minutes reading an article, watching a YouTube video, reading part of a book, listening to someone, having a conversation with another person? I truly believe that education is the way that we better ourselves as a movement and better ourselves as a society and move past these issues. And trust me, your work will speak for itself.
I mean, I'm right, DeRay, right? They blow me away. I feel like I'm not trying to be condescending at all, because obviously we knew that you all came with passion and talent and gifts, but the class, I'm just blown away by the way that you guys are carrying yourselves. DeRay, are we gonna have to lose you for another call? Right? You have to hop off. Do you want to say anything before you head off?
I'm a resource. I'm around. The only reason I'm cutting this short is that we have obviously, Briana, there was no indictment for Briana. The Cincinnati organizers who are close physically over there, they're about to do some really intense work, and we have a call with the Cincinnati organizers right now. So that's why I'm getting off, but I'm not getting off to go get like pizza or something. But my email address is just DeRay@DeRay.com. That's the easiest one. So if there's anything I can ever do to be helpful, like I'm here. It is always cool to be on a call with your teacher. I'm like, look at her. So yeah, I would just say, like, keep the fight. Like, what is the most cool about the protest, and this is a story we don't tell, is that in Ferguson, in St. Louis, people just came outside. Mike Brown's body was in the street and people came outside. They did. There was no committee that got them outside. There was no ringleader that got them outside. There was no one person or two people or three people that organized everybody. Like, people came out. And I had a big role to play, but there were a lot of people who had big roles to play. There was not one of us that like did everything. And I say that to say that, like, you have way more power than any system will ever tell you. The system wants you to believe that, like, you got to wait for the next one person or trio or whatever to do good work. Like, that is what systems do, especially systems like policing. They want to convince you that you don't have power, that your voice doesn't matter. Like, that's the game. So part of what I saw and learned is, like, I'm like, oh, we out here and we just not going nowhere. And not going nowhere changed, like, it changed it all. We were just like, you know what, we don't know everything, but we know Mike Brown should be alive, and that's absolutely enough for us. And, like, we carried that truth with us every single day for 400 days. You know, I slept in alleys, I slept in driveways, I slept in cars. I mean, we were really out there, and we carried with us one true idea, that Mike should be alive today. And that was enough. And there wasn't a chapter of anything that got us to do that or made us continue. So, like, know that you can do it, and, like, you can fight, and everybody will figure it out, and systems adapt and move. But we are trying to break a system that's never been broken before, and it'll take you. So good to be here.
Thank you. Well, the Giving Circle is going to use some of the administrative fees to make a donation to Campaign Zero, and as a thank you for this evening. And our panelists are don't know this, but they're going to all get autographed copies of your book when we can get the logistics worked out. So
I know that was me. She's being sweet. It's been a long week, and I gotta get up here. I have the books. I have
Baltimore. I'm like, let me drive over to your house and
give it to you. I know I'm not in Baltimore right now. I live in Mount Vernon. So if you know where the bun shop is in Mount Vernon, I live across the street from the bun shop. But I'm just not. I'm in New York this week, so
no problem. We'll figure it out.
I got you. I got you.
All right. Good luck.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you. All right. So thank you, panelists, for allowing me to sort of shift that around a little. I knew we wanted to have the opportunity to hear from DeRay, but now we get to kind of refocus back on you guys. So a little out of order here, but I'm going to get us back on track. So you guys have given some advice to younger advocates, but I'm actually interested in what advice you would have. We're kind of circling back to the teachers, right? So I heard a couple of you say, we want to move beyond performative action. And actually, I'm going to start by just asking someone to clarify what we mean by that. Because, DeRay was saying, now you have the language. I don't know if everybody on the call has language. So Beth, could I just ask you to sort of tell us what we mean when we're talking about moving beyond performative action?
I think moving beyond performative action, some of the points that like me, Deborah, and Stephen hit was like taking the time to genuinely educate yourself. Not just like looking at Instagram posts or looking at TikTok videos that talk about things, because that's not going to really inform you. This means taking the time to read articles not written by non-Black people. This means taking the time to read books written from the Black perspective about the Black experience. And then on top of that, I think like as a general thing, because I know that there's many teachers on here, taking the time to not wait for the school system to give you the resources to do things, going out of your way and taking those bias training classes, establishing a system in your classrooms in which it's inclusive to everyone, in which you are providing the right amount of support to all of your students, not just students that you think will be more successful, or not students you think are too ghetto or too ratchet or not worthy of things from their outer appearance, because we have to admit that we all carry those kinds of biases. And as teachers, as a learned thing from society and just media consumption, etc., you all carry a preconceived notion about what Black is or what people of color are. And you need to accept that and move forward and not be consumed and stalled by your white guilt, and take action now, because we can't keep waiting for these kinds of things. And yeah, that's kind of my point. Again, like not only educating yourself, but also taking the time to educate those around you. Call out racism when you see it in that moment. Don't wait until your Black friend about it and be like, oh, I wish I would have said this. No, you should have said it in the beginning. And yeah, passing the baton back.
That's great. I think Nusrat was going to expand on that a little bit too.
Yeah, Beth, I completely agree with everything you've stated, but just to go back and focus in on the teacher aspect, something I've seen from my freshman year of high school to now my senior year. Freshman year, my classes ranged from standard to honors classes and like 1 or 2 GT classes. And now I'm in like mostly AP and AP classes. But one thing that has really hurt me as a student of color, seeing come out of teachers' mouths, and this is not like a gross generalization, but some of my teachers, like there's a drastic difference in how they treat and perceive standard and honors kids versus their AP and GT students. And especially the way, like I've heard teachers talk about the standards and honors students to the AP and GT students. Like those, we're all human beings. We're all trying to accumulate knowledge from you as a teacher. And I completely understand that being a teacher within itself is such a loaded task, and it's a job that asks a lot from you. But when a student of color is in an AP class and hears you talk about other students that are the same ethnicity as them or color as them, but like they think to themselves, if I was in that class, this is how they would perceive me in the same scale just because of my skin color. And I think that's one bias that teachers either need to like check themselves on, or if they see another teacher talking to them, having a conversation like that, going in that direction, we definitely have to do our part in speaking out, and as students ourselves, if we see teachers do that.
Thank you. So again, when I was asking DeRay for actionable items, I mean, I think that's such a, you articulated that so clearly, right? I mean, that's a behavior that teachers may not even know that they're doing, right? And so we're trying to sort of, shine a flashlight on that. I know Bree and Michael also had some other things to contribute to sort of this question of, what do you say to white teachers that want to be allies but they feel nervous or they're not really sure how to create safe and empowering spaces. So maybe Bree, could you take that?
Yeah. So no, because I've been having this conversation a lot with other people lately, honestly, because like people have asked me, like, because they see me posting about like my frustrations and like the lack of consideration that I've seen and experienced throughout just all my years in school altogether, including elementary. And they're asking me like, how do you expect teachers to do that? I'm like, well, all it really takes is a conversation. Always ask questions. It's never a bad thing to ask questions. And you also have to hear your students out if they openly speak about it. And you can't gaslight them and tell them that they're wrong. Because I've had an experience with a few teachers where it's just like, that wasn't my intention. That's always like the first response to me addressing their casual racism or something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I'm glad that wasn't your intention, but you haven't promised me that you won't do it again. You haven't promised me that you've learned from it. You haven't promised me that it will come off as a ignorant thing to say or do. People like me. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Absolutely. In that case, intent doesn't matter, right? Michael, I think you were going to add on to that, right?
Yes. Something I want to stress to the teachers on this call, especially elementary and middle school teachers, is that you guys are interacting with your students. You guys are probably the second most people who interact with your students on a daily basis, otherwise than like the students' parents and everything. And so you guys have such an influence over your students and how they can turn out in the future. And so I just think you guys should encourage your students to practice values such as treating everyone with respect and just trying to get them to help each other out, because racism is the belief that people feel that they are above other races. And so just reinforcing ideas that that we're all in this together, everyone in this world, we're all just trying to live together. And it's going to take all of us together to create a safe space for everyone in this world. And so I think the greatest lessons that you can teach your students is just how to be a good human being and how to be a good resource to their friends and to their peers.
Okay, all right. So I love so much about what each of you have done is you've come up with different actions or behaviors that you'd like to see teachers do. And Beth, I started with you when we were talking about the moving beyond performative. What I want to sort of call attention to as we're getting closer to the end here is that today is in many ways an opportunity for people to educate themselves, but simply attending something can be perceived as performative as well, right? I showed up, I did this, I posted this lawn sign, I joined a book club. Those are all really important first steps, right? But what we're asking now, what you guys are asking now is to move beyond that, right? And so I think I want to let folks in the audience, I guess, think about that. I want them to think about questions that they might have for you. And I'm going to go ahead and ask a question that is going to be answered by everyone. So it'll take a few minutes as we go through. And then it looks like, beyond all reason, we are maybe going to have an opportunity to have a couple questions at the end. So go ahead and enter your questions as you're coming to them. I want to remind folks that if we don't get to your question, it's not because it's not a good one. We might run out of time. But we are going to be, finding ways for you to communicate with these students afterwards, and we'll have a little time for wrap up. So the question I wanted to ask of all of you really is, what does activism look like to you? And some of you have touched on this, so don't feel like you have to repeat yourself. But what does it look like to you? And I really want to hear, in particular, how the march and how your experience with your peers here has changed your career trajectory, because I know for many of you it has done just that. So similar to the way that DeRay quit his job and slept in an alley in Ferguson. I don't think anyone's done that. Nobody's dropped out of school. But how has this experience changed you? So I'm going to start with Taylor, and then we'll just kind of go on down.
Well, for me, I feel like some people regard activism as somewhat political, and it can be political. However, in the case of Black Lives Matter and other things, it truly is human rights and just being a decent human and being kind to others and being, encouraging and helpful to others. So for me, activism is realizing there's a problem, telling others, educating yourselves, and then truly working to fix it, truly working to see change, and truly working to see, truly working to help lift up others. So we're all equal, so we're all at the same pace. And, being involved with this march and this group has been such an enlightening and comforting experience, just to see how many people I've never really met before. I've never really met any of these guys before this happened. And I'm just so happy that I met them. I'm so encouraged just to see how many people have, gone through the same thing, gone through similar experiences I have, and are coming together, to work to achieve change, to advocate for something that's so important to me and so important to all of us. So thank you guys for bringing me into this. And yeah, I'm just very happy to be here.
Stephen, I think you were up.
So activism to me is a part of my everyday life. So since being involved with our protest and others like it, it's kind of confirmed that as a white person and as a white student, it's something I need to work at every single day. Like I said earlier, educating myself every single day and those around me. I've kind of always wanted to do political science, but this experience has really confirmed my need to be a public servant and get my voice out there and help those who need it. And my biggest hope for our future is that we'll have less causes to fight for. So.
I like that. Deborah, our graduate, right?
I've decided to pursue I want to be a doctor. Let me just start by saying that. And I've decided to pursue my want of being a doctor by going into college on the pre-med track. So I am now a public health major on the pre-med track. And I've always wanted to specialize in oncology, and I still want to specialize in oncology, but over the past couple of months and after this march, I've decided to take a step back and look at the racism that comes in medicine and medicinal history. Race is one of the biggest ethical dilemmas when it comes to medicine, and for me, researching those dilemmas is what shaped my future career goal. So after this march and hearing everybody's stories, I've been looking into some of the prominent figures, and my all-time favorite person to look into is Henrietta Lacks. And then for those of you who might not know her, in 1951, she was diagnosed with terminal cervical cancer. And in the midst of her treatments, her doctor, without her consent, took and sent her tissue biopsy to Johns Hopkins, where at the time they were trying to find live cells to perform experimentations on. And her genetics were extraordinary and nothing they'd ever seen before. And despite the fact that they were detached from their host, her cells were able to replicate infinitely. So they were used to produce the first human cell line, which is now used for research on the basis of cancer, AIDS, and polio research, among many other medical breakthroughs. And so after the march, I really became interested with ethics in relation to race, and Henrietta Lacks' story really drives it home, because at the time, Johns Hopkins was the only place, she's from Baltimore, it was the only place that let minorities go to get treated, and oftentimes and many times the Black people would get taken advantage of in medical settings, and they still do today. In Henrietta's case, not only did they take her cells without her consent, but they distributed her cells nationwide to multiple other hospitals and research labs. And you could say that they were doing this for the good of science, but at what cost? The cost of a human life. Even after Henrietta Lacks died, her family was still not aware of what was happening. So for me, the march really shaped my goals by pushing me to further pursue education on ethics in relation to systemic racism in the medical field.
I know you're going to be a doctor and you're going to be a great one, but man, you sound like a natural teacher. Like you just have to take advantage of those teachable moments. I love it. How about Nusrat? You tell us about how this has changed your career trajectory.
Thank you. Before I get into my personal stuff, I would just like to point out how much of like this group forming and coming together and being able to pull things off like this and the protest is in itself a privilege, because we have the resources and the guidance to do so. Whereas think about like just like a school so close to ours like Lansdowne and Woodlawn, like I'm sure those students have even like greater experiences that need to be heard, yet the way the resources that are available to them won't allow them to do so. So I think one of the main things that's kind of saddening, but is actually an inspiration within itself, is us as Catonsville, a majority white school, us coming together. We should also be thinking about the other students who are silenced and going unheard. And like this platform that has been provided to us and we take use of is such a privilege. So I just wanted to point that out. Anyways, me personally, for 3 years of my high school career, I was supposed to go into computer science, and Beth has been friends with me ever since since I was a freshman, and she knew that was not for me. I've always loved public speaking, and I'm very much a people person, but I don't know why I settled for computer science. But this experience has really showed me that this activism is like a one and done, die hard thing for me, and it just is the medicine to my soul because I just love it so much. And it's really given me an opportunity to branch out as a human being and learn the experiences of my neighbors, my fellow students, and just giving them a platform to voice their experience is such an amazing thing. And for me, activism is being a decent human being. Whether you're doing it at home, on the streets, or in front of your laptop, you're an activist whether you like it or not, if you want to be a human being.
Awesome. Beth, I think you're up.
Yeah, and just like Nusrat said, I yelled at her for a very long time over computer science, 3 years. And for me, just like what Nusrat said about our group and stuff, like I personally at Catonsville for a really long time, being the only like Black girl in a room is a long and very well heard story. And for the longest time before meeting this group, I thought that our school was like one and done. Just I go to school, I leave, I don't have to deal with it. It's just I'm alone in this, and that's something that I had started to almost accept. And then when this group banded together, it's like my whole life just like shifted. I'd always been almost like an activist, but quietly, because I was scared of disrupting the comfort and the security of like my white peers. And with this group and BSU and all these organizations, they've really given me the strength and they've given me the platform to just say what I need to say. With the protest, I always make the joke that I walked into the protest without like a single doubt in my mind. I was ready to be an art therapist. I wanted to live a simple, secure life. Not saying that being an art therapist is bad. I think about it a lot. But I wanted to live a life of comfort and security. And I didn't want to have to ever be in uncomfortable situations. I wanted to take what little I had and just like go with it. And I wanted to live a life of like simplicity. And then I came out of the protest, I not at all referencing school or anything, but I had confronted a bully beyond just Catonsville, but I had confronted systemic racism in education that had plagued me and my peers, my Black peers, for the longest time. And I realized that I can't keep sitting on the sidelines. I can't keep appealing to this white comfort, and I can't keep trying to water myself down so that people will like me, or so that I can get by, or so that I can live a life of security. I have to stand up for what I believe in, and have a sense of intersectionality with my activism. And now I, kind of similar to Stephen, I want to study political science, and I want to study law, and I want to go into the field in which I can make change on a structural and policy level. Someone I look up to, I know Deborah also referenced someone, I am a huge fan of AOC. And she is someone, a very prominent figure that probably a couple of people here know about. And if you don't know about her, look her up, Alexandria. She's a congresswoman, and that is what I see my future as. I want to, with no matter what I have, no matter what platform I am, no matter, just like DeRay, if I am in an alleyway or a penthouse, I want to stand up for those around me. And I want to make sure that I don't have to keep having these hard conversations. And I want to secure a valuable and attainable, equitable future for beyond just myself, but for my family members, for my neighbors, for everyone around me. And yeah, that is how the protest has impacted me. And I've also, from the protest, been given so many like amazing opportunities to speak with these organizations and join things and build things and create things with my peers. And I owe it all to the protest, and I owe it all to the 60 people who stepped up with me that day.
I don't know how, Bria, you're gonna follow that impassioned speech, but I can't wait to hear I haven't heard your story before. So how has this changed it for you?
Oh, well, okay, so see, activism has kind of always been part of my lifestyle. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's like the same thing for like most Black people and like all people of color in general, because it's like, you have to live through that and you have to address it to one another sooner or later. But like when I was really young, my dad like told me, he was like, this is how it is. People are going to look at you differently because you're Black. Have you experienced racism yet? I said, no, mainly because I didn't know exactly what it was until he explained it to me. It was like, he came back and asked me the same question again. It's like, have you experienced racism? And I was like, then yes. I've been called all sorts of things. I've been called a monkey. I've been told I look manly all the time as an insult because I'm just a darker skinned Black woman. And I learned to live with that, unfortunately. And I haven't, okay, not that. I've learned that I'm going to get that throughout my life all the time. But I've also learned that it's like, I don't have to take that. I've always been outspoken about it. And I've always told people like, hey, cut that out. It's not cool. If they don't like it, then oh well. Like my dad's always taught me like, hey, if you run into a racist, just punch them. So that's how I've been able to operate. So the protest only, it just made the fire, like it was just like a done deal. I was like, okay, well, this is just what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. It's like, I'm already like, it just enlightened the fire like even more than it already did. Like the candles melted. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, it's amazing to hear. I think, Michael, you're our last one, and then I lied about the time. So we'll hear from you, and then I'm gonna wrap us up. But Michael, what about you? How has this changed your trajectory?
Well, like I said earlier in the call, I want to be an elementary school teacher. And with that, I was like, okay, well, I can work in the school during the school year, maybe have a side job as a photographer or something during the summer or something like that. But after attending this march and being involved in activism, I've realized that I can do more than just be a teacher in the classroom. And I actually now want to work on improving the educational system of the US, because it needs a lot of reformation, not only in regards to race, but just the system itself and how we're teaching students. And so I want to gain some type of position where I can create school policy and enact change, whether that's on a school board or something like that. And I just want to represent the voices of teachers across the country and in my school system or whatever I end up being a part of. And not only the teachers, but also the students and their needs and what they feel school should be like. So that's how I view my future career choice.
I mean, what a perfect way of bringing this together. You guys went into this conversation wanting to be, the Giving Circle wanted to be able to amplify your voices and give you an opportunity to speak in a more relaxed setting than behind a megaphone, to be able to articulate how we can actualize some of the demands. And hearing you talk about wanting to, combine activism with your role in education feels like a kind of a coming together. But it does mean that we're at the end of our time. So I want you to know, students, I've been saving all of the chats and the comments, and I can't wait to send them to you because you have no idea the impact that you're having already. There was so much that we didn't get to tonight, and I can feel that, right? I know that there was more that we wanted to say. This is really just the beginning of a conversation. So a lot of you had very specific questions for the students. So we are going to commit to this. We will share an email after this event with the recording and social media handles and organizations that our students are involved in, and information about DeRay and a link to his book, along with, I think, because a lot of people were sending me resources in the chat, maybe we'll call some of those resources and send them out there to you, because I heard from a number of people, DeRay and our students, that one of the ways that we move beyond that performative, that, posting a picture, putting a sign in our yard, all important things, but the way we move beyond is to arm ourselves with knowledge and to learn those statistics and understand the stories. So we'll also share some resources with you to do that. We're also going to ask for some feedback, because this is an important conversation and we want to get it right. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning of our time together that this year has been characterized by a national reckoning, but I am over the last couple of months increasingly optimistic that our own town is experiencing one as well, that we are listening and we are learning, and that new understanding, that proximity we talked about, is compelling us to find tangible ways to improve the community and to do, as Brian Stevenson said, find a way to make healthier communities. And I think that's something that every person that has chimed in or tuned in for this whole duration can get behind. So students, I thank you immensely for your vulnerability and for your honesty. Teachers, I thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to hear some of those things that may also feel uncomfortable. And to the rest of the community, thank you for helping us work together to figure out how to make our community healthier. So with that, I'll say good night and look for a follow-up email with those resources I mentioned. Thanks, guys.